Master Chief John Butera, Sergeant Major Sean Grantham, welcome, and thanks for taking the time for the conversation today in our series on great power competition. There's a lot of things I'm really eager to start talking about with both of you today, but why don't we kind of set the stage a little bit because it may seem odd to some that we have a Master Chief and a Sergeant Major in the Stockdale Center. You're among the two newest additions to the Stockdale Center and the Naval Academy at large. Um, Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got here, why you're here, and what you hope to do. I'll start with you.
Sure. Just this past January hit my 20-year mark. Prior to this, before joining the Navy, undergrad, then the whole time I've been in the Navy have been in the SEAL teams. Finishing out with my last tour as the Command Master Chief for SEAL Team 8. I think one of the kind of what attracted me to come here to the Stockdale Center was, after you do your SEAL Team Command Master Chief tour, the ability to touch, the junior folks and get them, do the mentorship and coaching piece is a little bit limited as you kind of start to move up in echelon.
Sure.
The Naval Academy kind of gives that opportunity to, start our future leaders, off on the right path, and then also learn a lot, back. And I think that was why NSW saw value in investing a 9, because there's not a lot of us, and it definitely was a tax on our community to be able to cut away a post command 9 up here. But everything that I'm able to bring to the Naval Academy, I'm also able to bring back to NSW and make NSW that much stronger and more prepared for that next fight.
Right. I love it.
So
I love it. And that's the hope, right? This is going to be
it's a two-way street.
Yeah, two-way street. We're plowing some of these lessons back into the fleet. That's been a charge from the Marine Corps side of things, as well as from the NSW side of things, Naval Special Warfare side of things. So we're just starting on that process now. Excited about that. Sergeant Major, how about you? What's the backstory?
All right, backstory. Well, it's been here about 2 months now. 24 years in the Corps. Reported to boot camp August 2001. So a unique perspective to come in right before the attacks on September 11th, which obviously had an influence on the rest of my career experience. Tactical Air Defense Controller by trade. So in that capacity, deployed 4 times, 3 to Iraq, and then once in support of Iraq, Afghanistan, and combined defense of the Arabian Gulf. But really in only 2 of those deployments was I doing air direction, air control. The rest of it was security missions, convoy security, manning control points. So kind of bringing truth to life of Marine and Rifleman. Definitely an important aspect of who we are, and I was happy to live that part of it. Spent some time as a recruiter, and then ultimately my career direction changed to First Sergeant Major. Spent some time in the MLG, the School of Infantry, and then most recently, before coming here in Iwakuni, Japan, with the C-130 Squadron and a MALS, Aviation Logistics Squadron. So when I had the opportunity to come to the Naval Academy, I jumped all over it. It's a unique place, steeped in tradition. Some of the best commanders that come to mind were all alumni from the yard. So inspired by them, and as it became more of a reality, I was excited about their stories. And then now I get to live it, one, through my experiences, both with the Marine Detachment in the Stockdale Center and talking with the midshipmen every day. So I'm looking forward to personal growth, but most importantly, just like Bert was talking about, being influenced the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, I think the operative word for both your responses is experience, right? I mean, you bring so much to the table that is so absolutely unique. Let's start with you, Sergeant Major. Since you just came from the Pacific AOR, area responsibility, and have a pretty strong background in that part of the world, of course, just broadly across your career, you know that this conversation is great power competition, and now that we've kind of rolled out this series of short films, we've rolled out a series of podcasts in support of those short films to get people to better understand it. What's the one big message that you have about what's going on right now in Indo-PACOM as an example that really we all ought to be aware of. Those of us that have been here in Annapolis for an extended period of time. What should we realize about what the fleet and operating forces are focused on in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, that part of the world?
Sure. Well, six years combined in Japan, 3 years in Okinawa, 2016 to 19. Focus at that time was predominantly North Korea, and then most recently 2022 to 25 in Iwakuni, Japan mainland. And it was a distinct shift in our focus towards our pacing threat, the PRC. So I can definitely say that every day matters. Everything is observed. Everything that we do. It's not just the operations. It's not just extending our spear to deter. It's our garrison operations. It's our readiness. It's how we conduct ourselves day in, day out. That communicates to those who may want to challenge us our will to defend, our will to stand up for what our country believes in. So, my message, my emphasis as a senior enlisted within, a C-130 squadron, within a logistics squadron, is readiness, mental, physical, but most importantly, spiritual. And I'm not talking about who you pray to, more so what your higher calling is. And I think that really aligns to the nature of our nation, what it's founded on. So, because I think great power competition to senior military leaders, to congressional leaders, is development, acquisitions, and equipping the forces for the next fight. I think that for our small unit leaders, it's less complicated. There's plenty of room for individuals at the user level to provide commanders insight that changes the way we fight. But by and large, from my perspective, strategic competition is extended deployments. Yeah. It's utilizing old equipment in new ways. It's embracing new mentalities in longer hours. Right. Really excited to explore what leadership means for the midshipmen when they go to their naval posts and their Marine bases, on how they can contribute to getting their Marines and sailors ready for that.
Right. Yeah, ready for a whole new shift in mindset about what they and let's talk a little bit about that, because it's interesting. You had 6 years, as you said, in Japan, separated by only a couple of years. Did you notice a difference in the posture, in the difference in the mindset of readiness between your first 3-year tour in the area and your second one?
As far as readiness, no. I would, and that's one thing I'm proud of about the Marine Corps. I think that our ethos, our core values, and the foundations of what makes us successful: mental resiliency, physical fitness, and a focus on building trust through competency and character. I think that makes us well equipped as individual men and women to fight in any climate and place. Yeah. However, the operations briefs, the focus of our application of TTPs did definitely change.
Sure. Tactics, techniques, and procedures that
correct
the Marines are using to figure out the day-to-day operations.
Correct. Yeah. And so, extracting from our Marines the ability to overcome what we foresee being the obstacles in the future. And I think depending upon your community, what element of the Marine Air Ground Task Force you belong to, you're going to face different challenges within support roles like the logistics group within the wing. I think communications, the ability for small unit leaders to make decisions when we're distributed to lower our sure. our signature, I think, is going to be important. So we definitely tailored some of our conversations and some of our injecting problems to see what kind of solutions our Marines can come out with. That was definitely a change in how we operated from my first tour to my most recent in Japan.
And distributed is that pretty much spells the future, right? Force redesign and so on. The vision is, as I understand the current commandant's vision, to essentially distribute forces to make them much more survivable, much more lethal. But there's a requirement to be more agile to operate in those independent environments. I love that. Now, Master Chief, coming from your Command Master Chief tour at SEAL Team 8, but you probably had the full spectrum of operations there, I would imagine. But could you share some of your thoughts on strategic level focus in the naval special warfare community? Because after all, that's what the pivot of 20 plus years of counterinsurgency, your community in particular, kind of at the pointy end of that spear, pointed in that direction. Now, perhaps, at least in part, it's going to be shifting, maybe large part, toward a much more strategic mission to this pacing threat that the Sergeant Major mentions. Tell us a little bit about that, your experiences there. What does that pivot look like in your community?
Sure. Strategically for NSW, what we've really kind of taken a look at is, hey, look, great power competition, especially with China, is global. Yeah. And, there might be, locations that might not seem very significant when it starts talking about that. But when we start talking about natural resources, political influence, all those things, they start to become bigger drivers in that strategic decision-making process.
Fairly early on in the short film series on Great Power Competition, Admiral Keith Davids from your community had a really interesting point that over the course of the past 20 plus years, we've always enjoyed advantages along several lines. Mass, number one, we brought more stuff to the fight than our adversary was able to. Technology, we brought greater technology to the fight than our adversary was able to muster. And third, will. We brought a sustained long-term will to see these fights through. Do you have any thoughts on how that picture changes a little bit as we go into near-peer competition, great power competition, with a country that on all three fronts, but particularly at will perhaps, doesn't have a significant disadvantage, at least on paper? How do we prepare for that?
I think that will piece is kind of key.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different facets to when we start talking about that. From our side, completely volunteer force. On the military, I think from a U.S. perspective, will is one of our top assets. My concern is not necessarily from the military side, but from the civilian side. Do they have the will to weather if losing a couple guys, that was always a big deal. Hey, now are we okay with losing 5,000, an aircraft carrier going down? Do we have the will to continue that fight beyond there? When you look at it from the opposing side, the Chinese forces, do they have the will to continue that fight? Or is it just the government pushing that will? So I think that's kind of where we have a distinct advantage from the military side. But the concern is, hey, unless we have our Pearl Harbor moment, will the citizens of our nation, will they have the will to endure in whatever that future battle looks like?
For sure. Now, Sergeant Major, coming straight from the Pacific, right, along those three lines, right, maybe even starting with will, perhaps, because one of the scenarios that we are most closely focused on in our operational planning, of course, is the potential defense of Taiwan, assisting Taiwan after it's been attacked by China. Technology, also extremely important. Again, part of your world and the things that you were living with in the Indo-PACOM region. And even this idea of beyond just mere technology, the larger picture of how all of this gets integrated. What are the lessons here with that same framing that we ought to be thinking about?
Well, I think some of the lessons are when contrasting our types of government. With the PRC, you have a government that's very assertive and authoritative. Our democratic nation does open us up to some vulnerabilities. And so we don't enjoy the same freedoms in development and equipping the force. But what I think our advantage is when it comes to our government is the will. Just like Bert mentioned, I think a lot of strength comes from 100% truly a volunteer force. The people who are here are committed, and I think that outweighs the sum of our numbers. In the First Island chain, it's not just service members who are committed within the First Island chain; it's their families as well. So I think we demonstrate every day with our presence across the First Island chain that the American will is committed to overcoming conflict. Technology, we're a little bit late to the game. We're preoccupied in Southwest Asia. That being said, it's a pacing threat. And force design, at least from the Marine Corps' perspective, is just like the OODA loop. It's continuous. And I'm confident in our American ingenuity to catch up, if not maintain our competitive edge there. And mass, I don't think mass is always an advantage. Looking outside of just military and the other four instruments of national power, I think mass can sometimes complicate matters as well.
Especially too well for the Russians at the moment.
It's not. And then when you take into account demographics and how that has an effect on economics, I don't think that some of the apparent characteristics of the PRC or just China as a whole are put them in as much the strength position as one may believe. So I have a high degree of confidence in where we're at and where we're going. Being stationed in 6 years in Japan, seeing the amount of attention, the amount of partnership, not just in the joint, but with our allied nations, I have confidence for what we can achieve together.
So both of you, coming straight from the Fleet and Operating Forces, bring the perspective of what the fleet has been doing for some time now. It's often said that China and the U.S. differ in many ways. When we think about our coming competition, maybe conflict with China, we're studying how they've been practicing their exercise. We mentioned the exercises that they've been doing, really large-scale exercises, and so on. But on the flip side, they're not watching how we've been practicing. They do observe that. They've been watching game film, as they say, right? They've got a pretty clear, pretty graphic record of how the U.S. military has been operating in war over the past couple of decades. Advantage to them, advantage to us.
Both. Yes, they've been watching how we have been operating in war. But the war we've been operating in is not the war that we're going to have with them. So they're building their capabilities and their tactics based off of what they've seen, and that can be a weakness. But I think as U.S. military, we have to really kind of remember that it's like, hey, we can't start this next war the same way we've been fighting. Like, we have to be adapting right now. I think going into it.
No, I'd agree with John. The watching how we fought in the war on terrorism isn't necessarily looking at our playbook for how we conduct operations in Indo-Pacific. And so I think we reap the benefits of some of the senior members who have remained from those wars. How to build teams through conflict, how to build resiliency. But we are having to exercise new muscles. We're having to develop new plans and new methods. Having been part of the observation of what's happening in our backyard out in the Pacific, and being part of what's being observed, we are evolving, we are adapting. So I don't think that we've lost too much in giving them a look at how we operate in a different part of the world.
So if the poster outside the Stockdale Center is emblematic of the theme of this extended conversation, we're at war. Are you doing all you can? And if the theme of our conversation here today is the experience that the two of you bring to the table. What is it about your experience, especially since you're both extremely experienced in terms of war, what the worst case scenario that we're going to send midshipmen out to? What aspect of your experience is most important in the coming years?
I won't be specific because it deals with failure. But I think those are the lessons that stick out the most to me.
Sure.
They're the lessons that drive me, not just here, but in previous assignments, and I know will continue in the future. And it's deployed, and it's dealing with unnecessary risk. I would say that an overconfidence in what you think you know, a lack of fellowship, fueled by your overconfidence in that, can make you blind to your environment. Opportunities to increase your marine survivability, lethality. Once again, as an NCO, there's a very specific time deployed when I lost sight of that based upon my own perceived abilities to achieve the mission, and it took somebody with higher experience to rein me in. So I think as I'm thinking about my ability to mentor and coach here to midshipmen, I think that what I've been inspired in them by is their exuberance, their excitement to get out there, their intelligence, but there's also a bit of followership and the ability to learn from all different angles. It's not just imparting your wisdom and your intellect, but it's also receiving that, translating into something useful, and don't fall in love with yourself.
Yeah, so I'm hearing humility as one of the key character traits that we have to draw out. Love it, Bert.
From looking at my past experience, one of the things that will be key for like the midshipmen and our future leaders kind of moving forward is training beyond the requirement. Whether or not just a simple example of being in the gym. You're not just going to lift what you need to lift. You want to be stronger. So when we're doing our when we are training, making the problem sets more complex than what we think we will experience, with China. And that way, when we actually do, if we actually, finally do get into direct conflict with them, it's easy. I mean, I don't want to necessarily say it's going to be easy, but it's not a reach. We're not figuring it out then. So I think that's kind of the big thing is being comfortable with failure, making our exercises, making our training so difficult that we will fail. And it's going to take us a couple of times of iterating to figure out the best way to do it. So that way, later down the line, we're not figuring out on the fly.
Yeah,
it's going to happen, but maybe not to that extent. So I think from an NSW's perspective, since we're short of bang right now, really kind of that preparation of the environment, so that way, hey, we're not playing catch up when something does happen. We are already everywhere, and not necessarily meaning physically everywhere, but those relationships have been built, and we're ready to, we haven't given up anything.
Yeah.
Which I think is easy to do when the focus is the Pacific.
Yeah. So I love that. And when I hear you say that, I think of a phrase that we use around here all the time. With midshipmen in particular, you're in your prep time. Right? This 47 months that we have them here, you are in your prep time for something bigger. The leadership challenge that you're going to experience out there in the fleet is something you need to take advantage of every minute. As you know from the short film series, we focus a little bit on that poster that's right outside the Stockdale Center. We're at war. Are you doing everything that you can? Now that you've been here for a little bit, you've actually spent some time in the classroom as well, right? In the ethics classroom, and you're branching out into the leadership classroom in a formal instructor capacity. Give us your reaction to the education of midshipmen here. What's being done right? What are some of the things that maybe surprised you in a positive way? And where do you see the opportunities, the possibilities of building the program to make them better prepared for the environment that they're going to head out into?
No, I mean, I think just from my one semester here so far, very, very impressed. One, just I think, young folks being able to ask the questions that they're asking, with the, amount of life experience they have at this point, I've been super, super impressed. I think one of the things that the Naval Academy does extremely well is the experiential learning piece. And I think that is something that is really going to prepare the midshipmen for that next fight. And especially when we're talking in the great power competition piece. The classroom part is great. The questions they ask, the discussions we have are fantastic. But then actually applying it in various ways, I think is kind of that thing that really kind of pushes the program, beyond and makes it special.
Yeah, the leadership laboratory.
Yes.
And on that front, one other thing, you were focused on a bit in the short film series, right? On sitting in on some of the capstones and having reactions to what they were trying to do in those capstones and how they were trying to make contributions directly to the fleet. Any thoughts on that laboratory? It's laboratory applied in a slightly different way. Any thoughts on what you learned in that process?
I thought it was great. I mean, you take a midshipman who has no idea how, a SEAL team operates or whatever, and we give him a problem set. Hey, we need to figure out a better way to get from a small boat up the side of a big boat. Come up with a solution. And you kind of leave it kind of vague like that. I think the problem you when you're part of these units for an extended period of time, you get very used to doing it the same way. So getting fresh ideas, and some work, some didn't work, but getting some fresh ideas about, hey, like maybe we could do it this way. I thought was awesome. One of the teams I was working with, I kind of felt bad when I walked out of the room. I was like, man, I just completely crushed their souls and whatever else. But they had some really, really good ideas. And they were looking at ways that I never looked at when I was, at the operational team. And, kind of giving them some feedback and be like, hey, like when guys are about to come over the top of a boat, they need to be able to get to their pistol and grab it. And they're like, oh, cool. They didn't know. But then they were able to go back and iterate on their design and make it that much better. So I thought it was pretty awesome.
Yeah. Having an operator's perspective is something that we used to have to outsource for, right? There's a lot of staff and faculty here directly coming from the fleet, and always has been. But for some of these more specialized things that you're referring to, those are conversations we'd have to arrange to bring people in for. Now we've got these resources right here. And on that point, Sergeant Major, right, the senior enlisted footprint at the Naval Academy for the longest time, other than the command master chief for the superintendent, the brigade master chief, and senior enlisted leaders associated with each company of midshipmen had a senior enlisted leader. That footprint is expanding dramatically, and you're evidence of that, right? So not only is there more education going on here at the academy, which in the Stockdale Center we refer to as the down and in mission, because we're split, as you both know. The Stockdale Center is split somewhat evenly between an up and out mission, supporting the fleet, other government agencies, NATO organizations like that, and the down and in. I would like to get your thoughts on the up and out part, because we have a steady demand signal from the fleet. Bert, you were down at Parris Island not too long ago, talking to all the drill instructors down there and so on. We make very regular visits to the fleet and operating forces, conversations about leadership and ethics and so on. How might you imagine best leveraging your experience, Master Chief's experience, all these various folks that are relatively new additions to the place to push the message of what's being done, what's exciting here out to the fleet operating forces, other government agencies, and NATO?
One, it's a tremendous tool that I'm glad to be a part of to both on the Navy and the Marine Corps side, to be able to provide an outsider's perspective. We have tools for the commander, surveys to see how things are going. But typically you don't get a lot of insight from that. It's hard to interpret the results, but to have the ability to bring senior officers, senior enlisted, alongside with some philosophers in ethics and leadership, to take a different look, not influenced by the challenges, the constraints and restraints of that organization, but just to come in and listen, and provide coaching, questions that help them think and solve their own problems. That is one of my goals here, is to find ways to complement what the Marine Corps already has through the Legion Leadership Institute, and be distinct in how we improve leadership and ethics across the Corps. I'm really excited for the opportunity to go outside of that as well. Probably a little bit less inclined to provide like how I think we'll do there, but I really just in the short amount of time being at the Stockdale Center and the Naval Academy, just the amount of experience, combined experience and insight. I don't think there's a problem set that we can't get around.
Yeah, I think I already shared this story with you, but for the purpose of those listening or viewing this podcast, it's probably important to know that of all the work that we've done with NATO, for example, over the years, and we've been writing curriculum for NATO and in the process working with their Partnership for Peace program, which is typically focused on both African countries and former Soviet republics. One of the countries we worked most closely with over the years has been Ukraine. And we had a senior officer on their general staff accompany us on a kind of a long-term conference that we had been a recurring conference, crafting leadership and ethics curriculum. And this senior officer had pretty much just rotated in from their operating forces. And he made the claim that of all of the technical, tactical, even strategic lessons that have been shared with them over time as part of NATO's Partnership for Peace outreach efforts, the thing that he thought was the biggest difference maker was the development of a doctrine, a policy, a structure for an NCO Corps, let's say a non-commissioned officer corps, which in their tradition was absent. They, of course, were born of a Soviet model, and even the Russians today don't have an NCO Corps, and it shows. His point was it's made all the difference because they're able to push down decision-making authority to the lowest level, to junior officers, platoon commander level, to senior enlisted leaders out there in ways that always enabled them to be inside of that decision loop of the enemy, the Russians in this case, that famous OODA loop of John Boyd, observe, orient, decide, act. They could just process much more quickly, make much better decisions. This has pretty great ramifications for our conversation on great power competition, doesn't it? Because the Chinese, in a sense, lack that same ability to push down decision-making authority. Can you talk about your thoughts on perhaps how we might influence the larger conversation, perhaps an international conversation, about the development of a strong NCO Corps among our allies?
Well, I think the case studies, and to use Ukraine again as an example, and it was very apparent, especially in the earlier days of that war, the lack of speed of trust, giving NCOs, enlisted personnel, the authority, the opportunity to demonstrate their competency and skill and character to make sound decisions when things are hard. I think is really at the heart of it. Marine Corps, we've been doing this for a while, and I think and NCOs, we grow them a little bit earlier than some of the other services. In Japan, we had the opportunity to work with the Japanese self-defense forces, integrating some of their service members into our academies, and got a lot of the same feedback as far as the lack of that that program and how important they perceive it to be. So whether it's examples working with the JSDF, some of the things we've taken away from recent conflicts, the effect of increasing the speed of decision making, the accuracy information, the ability to operate distributed across an operations area. You can't do that without a strong NCO Corps. And I can't imagine a nation who wouldn't want to reap those benefits.
Yeah. Master Chief, your community is very famous for this, right? So as Sergeant Major mentioned, the Marine Corps has long used mission orders to push decision-making authority down, but the SEAL teams thrive in this environment as well, right? Decision-making is placed at the individual operator level oftentimes. Can you talk a little bit about how naval special warfare might inform the way we think and do officer-enlisted relationships, tactical operations, the things that our graduates in all communities, whether it be aviation, surface, Marine Corps, SEALs, doesn't matter, subs, how might the mindset of the speed of trust, as was mentioned, maybe be brought forward from NSW into the larger academy curriculum?
For sure. Yeah, I think for, our future, military leaders, kind of instilling them this thought that, hey, you're better utilizing all your assets. You can have a 1,000,000-man army, but if you don't have the ability to actually utilize them all at the same time, then what good is that?
Yeah.
And that's that top-down piece. Like if you have, just a few key decision makers, that really slows down that whole kill chain. So I think starting the midshipmen off, and really kind of instilling upon them that, hey, look, giving good task and purpose really is, going to allow you to utilize all your assets in a much more timely manner, I think is kind of something that we can do right here. And I think that's something that with NSW, because we are relatively small units, that's what's made us successful. Commanders are able to give task and purpose. And as long as, the guys are working within the left and right limits, they're kind of free to execute because they know what the purpose is.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key thing. A lot of times leaders, they give task and they don't give the purpose. So that kind of, they can get to a certain point. All right, the task was to jump 3 times.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah.
As opposed to, hey, I need you to jump 3 times because we're trying to get over to that,
Yeah.
island.
I could just hear some old salts listening now and saying, oh, you got to give the why. That's a generational dynamic and so on. Sell me or sell that old salt. Maybe I'm representative of that generation. I don't know. But sell as to why purpose. And I love the framing of it as task and purpose. That's something very common in your community, as I recall from the SEALs, because the SEALs have a growing footprint around here, as do the Marines, right? I love that framing, but tell us why and how that's so important. And in that sense, maybe give us some insight as to what these soon-to-be ensigns and second lieutenants need to know about the communication needs of their young enlisted sailors and Marines.
That purpose piece is so critical, and I think it's because we're not always going to agree with the orders.
Yeah.
We're not always going to agree with, hey, doing, whatever task. But if we have a purpose to it, then, it becomes a lot easier to digest. Hey, someone's not telling me just to jump off this cliff, just to jump off the cliff. Like there's a reason behind it. And therefore, maybe that makes me more creative in figuring out the solution. If you just give me a task, it kind of limits me in terms of my creativity, in terms of like a problem set and executing it. But having that purpose, really kind of gives the individual the latitude to come up with that.
What Bert's talking about here is turning kind of a traditional view, at least, of military leadership on its head, right? To empower, to inform. It's not, to continue your way of describing it. If I tell you to jump, the only thing I want to hear back is how high. You're describing the larger purpose and point of it all. Again, maybe I'm talking in stereotypes now, but your tribe is my tribe. On the Marine Corps side of things, is there room for that going forward? Because the Marine Corps in particular, at least the perception is that super structured, super hierarchical. How do you communicate to future second lieutenants about to head to the fleet that there's a lot of ways to do leadership? And what are your recommendations for better understanding the young Marines that they're going to be responsible for real soon?
Right off the bat, I completely agree with Bert. I think that, to talk about generational leadership, the things that divide us, old timers, and I guess that's a shifting term depending on where you stand, but we're outnumbered. We rely on the next generation to lead and to execute. And I think that leadership is all about influence. So we have to be able to speak their language. And if their language if they're best influenced, and we get the best product out of finding the time, making the time, because that's always the problem. Not enough time to give them the reason why. And I that's been center in my development of staff NCOs and junior officers is you have to make the time, you have to invest in it. You can talk about, start with why. You can talk about, what is at the foundation of who we are and what we fight for. At the end of the day, I wholeheartedly believe and have experienced that if Marines understand why things suck, they'll embrace the suck. I definitely think there's room for it. And I've noticed that in my more recent years within the Marine Corps, leaders orienting themselves towards that approach. Because Marines need to understand not just what we're trying to achieve today, but the second, third order effects, which makes the immediate static, the obstacles of today, puts them in perspective and easier to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more. Let me pull a string a little bit more on this idea that, because you've been in the Marine Corps a long time. Could you give me some other examples of the things that you have seen change over that time? And it can be the expectations of the young Marines, but it can be anything.
Well, here recently, a heavy emphasis on the individual Marine. And Marines have always been center to our strength. But I think that starting from headquarters, Marine Corps down, when you look at outside of force design, if we look at talent management, if we look at how we evaluate Marines, giving Marines the ability to control what they can control, maybe not being so hardline in our PCS cycles, contributing towards programs that help spouses with employment and education. I think when we invest in our people, that demonstrates that your opinion matters, your insight matters. I think that with the new generation, what I was a little bit hard to get to become comfortable with, but I've learned to embrace it, and I really communicate with my subordinate leaders within the organization to embrace as well as junior service members who are less enamored by rank. Yeah. They respect the chain of command. Yes, you may even have to earn their respect through demonstrating a bit of competency and character. But in doing so, there is so much more familiarity with current technology, with communication methods. I have examples of, a Marine NCO going against contractors saying you can't do this particular thing with this piece of equipment, and then finding a way to remote a sensor from a ship land base, or even things that are not dealing with exquisite pieces of equipment, just trucks. Finding opportunities to streamline maintenance that increases readiness throughout the enterprise. I think that if we don't find ways to cultivate creativity, a feeling of ownership of the mission, we lose out on instances like that.
Yeah. So you're talking about leadership as harnessing creativity, harnessing good ideas, harnessing human talent. Maybe that's not so different from the way the Marine Corps has traditionally done it. Maybe it's just communicated in a slightly different way. But the end goal of leadership remains unchanged. That warms my heart. And I think it's going to warm the heart of a lot of folks listening in on this. Now, Master Chief, by the same token, you've been around a long time in the Navy, a long time as well. And of course, you were there at a particularly challenging time, a period of growth for naval special warfare over the course of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't think there's ever been in the history of NSW such a focus on the SEAL teams and what they're doing. And as a result, you've seen a ton of change as well. Can you maybe characterize that change and how things are different perhaps when you first came in to where they stand right now, and maybe even project, like the Sergeant Major did, a little into the future and what it means to us going forward?
Kind of hitting on what Sean said, like the folks coming in right now, they have so much more access to information. So it's built into their kind of DNA to ask questions. And I think that's kind of one of the changes that has kind of happened. And then, the other piece too is like the folks who are coming today, like they weren't even born when September 11th happened.
Yeah.
So the motivations are a lot different. When I came in, I saw the towers go down. That was a big driving factor for me to join the Navy. And that was, for the vast majority of my career, a big motivating factor. These individuals coming in now, like, it's a piece of history. They've read about it, they know about it, but I don't think it necessarily is the same driving factor. Now, it's a lot easier to sell them new missions where it's like, hey, look, mission success is going in, doing this thing, no one knows about it, and moving back and not getting in that gunfight, not, actually trading blows with the enemy. And I think they're a lot more accepting of that type of mission set versus, the guys who came in after 9/11 and wanted to, go and, get the bad guys. So I think there is that change. But I think that's NSW, but probably in the military in general. As far as the changes within NSW, like right now we're focusing a lot more on what makes like our unit special. Like what are the things that we can do that other units can't and that we can bring to the fight, and really kind of focusing in on, how are we trained to those specific mission sets? How are we equipping those mission sets? And really kind of, instead of trying to do everything, focus our time and assets to those things, because that's where, in that next battle, we're going to be able to, provide the greatest impact for the larger force.
Yeah. It's always challenging, and in some ways it's dangerous to project forward, to make guesses, perhaps informed guesses, predictions about the future. But if you could project yourself 10 years forward and looked back on the performance, particularly of our academy graduates, midshipmen now that you have in class, as to what their challenges might be, how their preparation brought them to a point of readiness for it, what types of things, though, really looking back from a 10-year perspective, do you think are going to be the most important aspects? I love before that you said it's the experiences, the experiential piece of it. But are there any particular character lessons or leadership lessons that you think are going to rise above all the other things that we try to take on? Because it's a lot going on here at the Academy. There's a lot of moving parts to this the developmental process. What are the couple strands, though, that really are going to make a difference?
Their ability to ask questions. I think, that shows their desire for personal growth, adaptability. And I think we talked about it during one of the Great Power Competition sessions, is AI. Yeah. That is going to throw, this completely different dynamic into that decision-making process, both, from leadership's ethics, that we haven't necessarily had to deal with in the past. Yeah. How are we utilizing AI? How are other governments utilizing AI? And the checks and balances that we're going to use, or maybe the opponent is not going to use, in the future.
Yeah.
I think right now the way that we're developing the midshipmen is really kind of giving them is instilling upon them the flexibility that they're going to need as future leaders in the 10 years from now. When right now we say AI and it's kind of cool and new, it's just going to be SOP for them 10 years from now.
Another decision support tool or
exactly
learning partner as they go, conversational partner, an aid of sorts in all things decision making.
100%. And like I think being in the military, sometimes we kind of get in this rigid kind of format. And I think the way that the midshipmen are being developed right now gives them that flexibility so that they can, be more adaptive in the future, which I think they're going to have to be.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd like to carry this through. Sergeant Major, with you now, you come from a relatively technical part of the Marine Corps, right? So since we just talked about the individual impact from that 10 years forward, looking back, if you could comment on culturally what, in this case, the Marine Corps is going to learn looking back 10 years from now about what's really important. Because, Bert brought up some really good points about AI as an example. In your technical world, aviation command and control, putting together these big pictures, AI is going to have a massive impact on that. But it may require a significant cultural shift. How do you see that happening? Is that possible? What's going to make that possible for the Marine Corps? Again, a highly structured, very tradition-oriented culture. How do we encourage it to adapt? Because it's our midshipmen today that are going to be making that culture shift happen. What's most important?
It's an interesting question because it's happening now. A concept that was first brought to my attention as a young Marine in the early 2000s has finally come to fruition. It's a common operator within the air defense community, air support community, combining all those under one equipment set, and they can go anywhere. Add to that with the onset of the MLRs, the Marine Littoral Regiments in the Pacific. Now we have a culture shift within that technical field where no longer are air defense, air support Marines solely operating within the air wing in the air control group. They're in the division. So 10 years from now, I see the Marine Corps working through some of the manpower. How do we pay for these through manpower, and more so, how did we get people to embrace this new role? How did we break out of just a technical mindset and think a little bit more about, once again, every Marine and Rifleman? What are the foundational skills that make us successful? I think an important aspect for leaders in approaching new environments is to build teams. When I'm thinking about the future fight, the implications of that fight, facing a threat that has a potential to affect us in ways that we haven't experienced since World War II. Distance is no longer the tyranny of distance is no longer a dilemma for our adversary. I think it's going to be building teams that empowers small units distributed throughout a vast operations area to work through, to demonstrate deterrence through resiliency, to fight through. And I think that's going to be on small unit leaders coming out of places like the Naval Academy. I think that without clear guidance, the ability to operate with intent, so that it's not an individual's plan, it is the plan. Took that from General Smith talking about force design. I think the ability to develop relationships with your personnel, but understanding that how we promote discipline, adherence to orders, build standards for all, and that is our center line, builds a relationship with our organization and our institution at large. And I think with that, regardless of what we project or what surprises us in the future, those foundational skills will make us successful. And I see it less of what do we learn and what do we prove is still relevant.
So the culture shift is well underway. We're getting ready for this next fight. we prepared to fight and win this next go round? Yeah. How about you, Master Chief? What your perspective coming straight from the fleet, knowing it's a tall task. Great power competition represents something that we haven't really experienced for a very, very long time. We're ready for this fight, and we're going to win this fight.
The issue we're going to have right now is we are, over the last few years, we've been so used to having air dominance, being able to communicate, all those things, that it's going to be difficult for leaders that have kind of experienced that in the past to be able to kind of take hands off a little bit and be like, hey, I'm going to give task and purpose. I'm going to assign this mission to a unit, and then I might not hear from that unit until they step back on the base, and that trust associated with that. So I think, especially for the midshipmen leaving here, kind of starting to instill upon that, hey, you can't necessarily move all the pieces all the time. You're going to have to be comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. So thinking differently about risk. So this idea of trust has a correlation to risk, and you think they're going to have to embrace risk in ways that perhaps we didn't have to in the past.
Yes, there's going to be a period of being very uncomfortable as we kind of adjust to what the new norm is going to be. But not to say that we can't. It's just there's going to be we can't fight the future war like we fought the past wars.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's going to have to be kind of like the future war is how we fought the past wars,
right,
as opposed to the most recent ones.
Yeah, that is the great challenge, isn't it? Preparing for the actual next war instead of returning to these cycles of preparing for the last war. That's an age-old challenge, no question about it. Speaking of age-old challenges, parting shot for what folks listening in on this conversation ought to think about in regard to the future of our Navy and Marine Corps based on what you've seen here at the Naval Academy to this point, and how it fits with your broader experience coming straight from the fleet.
Well, I think echoing the sentiment that this is a joint fight. This is a team fight, but it's also with our partners in Indo-PACOM. And I think the ability to speak to audiences of differentiating cultures, different generations within our own organization, connecting with people, I think is going to be really at the heart of what makes small units successful moving forward. So, for myself, the timing is apropos to be able to be part of a larger naval organization, albeit not operational at the moment, but to embrace Navy Marine Corps team is what I look forward to and what the future holds.
Yeah, and we're extremely excited to have you on this team to have this Navy Marine Corps conversation back and forth. So good things to come over the course of the next few years. Bert, how about you? Your thoughts on what you want to leave people with coming out of this conversation about the future?
I think sometimes I might be a little pessimistic about the future, but I think in general, the midshipmen come out of the Naval Academy, the U.S. military in general. I think we have some unique things that will make us very, very strong in that next battle. We might be going up against a military that has millions and millions of forces. And if we just try to, have decisive battles, that might be difficult for us.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we do very well is we dominate the entire battle space, the entire globe. And so we're forcing them to shift assets away from those and disaggregate, and, that's where we can start to find the cracks in their strengths. So I think overall, very, positive outlook for the future, and specifically into the great power competition, but it's going to take some growth, and it's going to, like we've talked about in the past, that uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think we have the adaptability to be able to get through those things.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, it almost goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's a perfect place to kind of tie together our conversation. Having an experienced Master Chief, having an experienced Sergeant Major in the classroom with midshipmen on the playing fields, on these various experiences within the leadership laboratory that is the Naval Academy, worth its weight in gold. So I could not be happier than I am with having both of you here at the Academy, specifically in the Stockdale Center. It's quite the honor, and I really looking forward to the conversations that you're going to have with midshipmen, the contributions you're going to make going forward. So thanks for your time on this.
Dr. Thomas, thank you.
Thanks for what you do here